Emily Turner and I, Nathan Bennett, got married right after finishing college, after 3 years of being together. Even though we graduated in the same year, I was 3 years older than Emily because I had spent 2 years in the Peace Corps before I started college. Our families were ecstatic about our decision to marry, but no one seemed more excited than my mother-in-law, Clara. Clara's excitement was a little different, though. She was thrilled because this was an experience she'd never had. She got to witness all the major milestones of our relationship: our engagement, wedding planning, and the ceremony. Things she had never been able to do herself. She had gotten pregnant as a teenager, struggled as a single mother, and was pretty much abandoned by her deeply religious parents. Then, just a few years later, she married a much older man, Gary, when she was 21, just to have some financial stability to help support Emily. Clara had never really experienced what it was like to have a genuine romance, a real engagement, or even a big wedding. Gary, her husband, had been married before and was the type who preferred keeping things low-key. He was a decent guy who took care of both her and Emily, but he was about as exciting as a chair. I always liked Clara, though. She was only 11 years older than me, and I never really saw her as the typical mother-in-law. In fact, she always felt more like an aunt to me. She was just as attractive as Emily, though a little shorter, with green eyes instead of Emily's blue, and maybe not quite as sensual. Clara had this lovely face that always lit up with a smile, and she genuinely had a heart of gold. Despite all that, though, Clara was extremely shy and dressed very conservatively, probably because of all the hardships she'd been through in her life. Years into my marriage to Emily, Gary unexpectedly passed away from a heart attack, though, considering his health, it wasn't a huge shock. Clara took it pretty hard, so I stepped in to help her manage Gary's estate. I tried to keep her involved in our lives and encouraged her to stay focused on her charity work. But one thing she absolutely wouldn't entertain was the idea of dating again. There were plenty of men interested in her, some much younger than her, but Clara wouldn't budge. Then, about 6 years into my marriage, I found myself in the all-too-familiar situation of being a clueless husband who had been deceived. Maybe I had been naive, but I wasn't blind. Once I confirmed Emily's affair, I packed my things and moved into a motel. I immediately began sorting through our finances. I honestly believed Emily loved me, but I could tell she had lost her way. To her, the affair meant nothing, and she didn't think it was a big deal. She kept telling me I was overreacting. I knew she'd confided in Clara, and while I never called her mom, it was always just Clara. I knew Clara had been asked to support Emily. 3 days after I moved out, Clara came to see me at the motel. I wasn't expecting it, but given how kind she had always been, I let her in. We sat on the couch and she took my hand in hers. "I'm so sorry, Nathan," she said softly. "I know I didn't raise Emily that way." I squeezed her hand to reassure her. "I know, Clara. You've always seemed like someone with strong morals. Emily's actions have nothing to do with you." A tear rolled down her cheek as she said, "I'm doing okay, but it's been tough." I nodded. "I'm all right." It was a shock, but I'm handling it. I've moved out, and while it'll hurt for a while, I'll get through it. Do you think there's any chance you could forgive Emily and take her back? I don't know how to handle this, I admitted, feeling the weight of it all. She thinks I'm overreacting, but she doesn't understand how serious this is. A tear slipped down my face. We spent the next hour talking about Emily and about life in general. When Clara stood to leave, she hugged me longer than I expected from a mother-in-law. As she pulled away, she looked me in the eyes and said, "Nathan, I really hope that if you divorce Emily, it doesn't mean you're divorcing me, too." I gave her a small smile and replied, "You'll always have a place in my heart, Clara." After she left, I felt an unexpected sense of comfort. It was like I had someone who genuinely understood me without any judgment or pressure to fix things with Emily. In that moment, Clara felt more like a real friend than a mother-in-law. That is, until I woke up that night, drenched in sweat from a dream I'd prefer not to mention. A week after moving out, I filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and told my landlord I was no longer responsible for the rent. Emily was livid, but I honestly didn't get why. What did she expect? We'd been together for almost 9 years, and I'd always been upfront about who I was. Emily and her lawyer tried everything, counseling included, which made those first few months way more complicated than I expected. I was in shock, but I stuck to my decision. I probably would have struggled more if not for the support of a few close single friends who kept encouraging me. Clara also checked in with me every week, not just to see how I was, but to share positive updates about her charity work. We met for lunch once a month, and Clara always seemed upbeat. But about 3 months later, we had a preliminary hearing scheduled for Monday at 1 o'clock. Emily requested counseling, but my lawyer shut that down with photos showing Emily having lunch with her new friend, Ethan, at least twice since I'd moved out. Even though Emily kept tearfully claiming nothing had happened between them, the judge wasn't buying it. Her actions spoke louder than words. The judge denied her request for counseling, and it was clear to everyone that this was likely the beginning of the end of our marriage, which seemed like it would be finalized in the next few months. The very next day, Clara called me at work, which didn't happen often, but I was always happy to hear from her. After the usual pleasantries, she cut right to the point. "Nathan, you probably know that Emily called me yesterday, really upset. It looks like the divorce will be finalized in a few months. Do you think that's how it's going to go?" "Yes, Clara," I replied with a sigh. "It's true. It's really hard, but I have no choice but to keep moving forward. My lawyer's pretty confident that we'll get the financial stuff figured out soon, so I'd expect the divorce to be wrapped up in about 3 months. I added, trying to stay composed. "I had a feeling you might be feeling down, so how about dinner this Friday? Would that be all right with you? I mean, I hope it wouldn't be too weird, going out with your soon-to-be ex-son-in-law?" I said, trying to lighten the mood. "If it is, I can always wear a disguise," she teased, making me laugh. "No, that sounds good," I replied, smiling. "You don't need to wear a disguise, Clara. I just feel like I might not be the best company." "Don't worry about it," she said warmly. "I'll make sure you have a good time, and I know you'll eat well too. I know cooking isn't your strong point, so what time should I pick you up?" I chuckled, realizing her playful jab about my cooking was her way of being a little cheeky. "I can meet you at the restaurant or you can pick me up," I said, a bit stubborn. "But no way am I letting you pay. No arguments, I'll pick you up around 7. "All right, it's a date," she said with a grin. That Tuesday night, I had another one of those dreams that left me unsettled. If this keeps up, I might have to talk to someone about it. But, much to my surprise, when Clara showed up at my door on Friday at exactly 7:02, she looked nothing like the woman I was used to seeing. She was dressed in a low-cut blouse that showed off her toned arms, a short skirt that gave me a glimpse of her legs, and 3-inch heels that added an extra layer of confidence to her stride. Her makeup was flawless, emphasizing her bright green eyes, and her new hairstyle framed her face in a way that made her look younger. Definitely not like someone who was 43. She looked like she was in her 30s, and I could sense she was a little nervous as she saw my reaction. "Wow," I managed to say, stunned. "You look amazing." "Thank you," she said with a relieved smile. "The restaurant's pretty fancy, and I didn't want to look out of place." "Is that a new outfit?" I asked, still trying to process the change. "Yeah, I bought this and a few other things this week. I figured it was time for a change," she said, looking a bit self-conscious. We headed out to the restaurant, a place with a dance floor. As we drove, I noticed her skirt had shifted slightly, revealing more of her legs than I'd ever noticed before. I couldn't help but admire how fit she looked. The dinner was fantastic, and Clara's lively energy made me forget, for a moment, all the pain I'd been carrying around with the divorce. But her drinking was definitely different from usual. Normally, she'd have 1 glass of wine, but tonight she ordered a bottle. I'm not much of a drinker, so I had 1 glass, but she finished the rest after dinner. She convinced me to join her on the dance floor, and even though I'd only danced with her a few times, once at Emily's wedding and a couple of times after Gary passed, I had never seen her so full of energy. She was glowing. Back then, she was a quiet, reserved dancer, but tonight, she was letting loose. After a few songs, we took a break, and she went to the ladies' room. When she came back, I said, "How did you get so good at dancing? I thought I was decent, but you were definitely better." "I've been taking dance lessons for almost a year," she said with a smile. "Did I do all right?" You were one of the best dancers here. And you definitely caught the attention of a lot of guys, I said, teasing a little. Oh, I didn't notice that, she said, her cheeks flushing. Just then, a guy came up and asked if he could dance with Clara. I froze for a moment, realizing people probably assumed she was my date. Once I composed myself, I joked, it depends on what my mother-in-law thinks. The guy looked embarrassed, and Clara swatted my hand playfully. He's joking, she said. But since this is only our second date, I don't want to disappoint him. Especially if some younger woman snatches him away. Thanks, but I'll pass. However, she added with a mischievous grin, if he leaves me, I'm sure I'll see you again. She laughed, put her hand on mine, and the guy kissed her hand before walking away. You're quite the charmer, I said, grinning at her. The waiter came by and placed a Bloody Mary in front of Clara and a soda for me. I was about to ask why, since we hadn't ordered anything, but she cut me off. I ordered it on the way back, she explained. Now I have a drink, and then let's go dance again. I'd never seen her drink anything stronger than wine, but she knocked back the Bloody Mary like it was nothing. We danced for another 5 or 6 songs until Clara leaned in close and whispered, I think I've hit my limit, both with the alcohol and the dancing. Can you take me home? I shouldn't drive. I might be drunk. I'm not sure, she added with a small laugh. I've never been drunk before, but I don't think I can drive without crashing into something. I fetched the car from the valet while she went to the ladies' room. When I got back, I drove her home. She lived in a cute, stylish house in a trendy neighborhood, about 8 miles from my place. I can just take a taxi home, she said, though she kept chatting away in the car, asking me if I had a good time and reminding me to forget about her cheating daughter, at least for a little while. When we got to her house, Clara fumbled with the garage keys. I took them from her, unlocked the door, and helped her inside. After she shut the garage door and bolted it, she reached into her purse and handed me something. I thought you might like this as a reminder, she said softly. I looked down to find a small token, a piece of clothing she'd taken off earlier. It was personal, but not exactly what I'd expected. Before I could react, Clara's expression shifted, and there was a new intensity in her eyes. Her vulnerability hit me like a wave. I've been feeling so lonely, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I just don't know how to deal with all of this anymore. She stepped closer, and I felt my emotions start to churn. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but another part hesitated, unsure about where this was going. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the air thick with tension. I could tell she was in pain, that she was trying to open up in a way she never had before. It wasn't just about the gesture or the item she handed me. It was the weight of everything that was left unsaid between us. I don't want you to feel alone, I said softly, my voice trembling a little, even though I was still grappling with my own confusion. Her eyes were filled with a mix of longing and fear, like she wasn't sure how to handle whatever was happening between us. But at that moment, I was too exhausted, both emotionally and physically, to think straight. She whispered, please stay the night, Nathan. I've never woken up with someone I loved before. Love? The thought lingered in my mind, confused and unfamiliar, but I quickly pushed it aside. There were more pressing things to deal with. As Clara settled her head onto my shoulder, I drifted into a deep, restless sleep. That night, my dreams were different, more intense, more vivid than I had ever experienced. Normally, I don't remember my dreams, but this time, each one was etched into my mind, clear as day. They all featured Clara. And then the last one, well, it wasn't just a dream. When I woke up, I felt something stirring below the belt, and that's when I realized it wasn't just some fantasy or figment of my imagination. It was real. Thank you for the best night and morning of my life, Clara said, her voice soft but full of a strange satisfaction. Her green eyes, bright with emotion, locked onto mine. We spoke easily, but I couldn't quite process everything that had just happened between us. It felt like a dream, like I hadn't fully grasped the gravity of what had transpired. But deep down, I knew this would catch up with me sooner or later. She smiled and then suggested, let's take a shower together. She leaned in for a quick kiss and I was tempted. Sounds tempting, I replied. But before I could even get out of bed, she pulled me back, her eyes welling up with something I hadn't expected. I'm sorry I said I love you, she whispered, almost as if it was a confession she couldn't take back. It was our first time together, and I could tell she was just as new to this experience as I was. She seemed almost giddy, like a teenager sneaking out for her first real date. Afterward, Clara, wrapped only in a short robe, was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared breakfast, her smile lighting up the room like it was her first true happiness in ages. It was an easy morning. She looked radiant, carefree. Honestly, it was probably the happiest I'd felt since my wedding to Emily. After breakfast, I insisted she get dressed while I cleaned up. She slipped into denim shorts, a blouse, and casual flats, and once again, I couldn't help but notice how youthful and fresh she looked. Her figure was effortlessly alluring. Her curves had a quiet confidence that was hard to ignore. We drove back to my apartment, and when we arrived, she asked, "Maybe you could show me your place? I've never been inside." "Sure," I replied, though I noticed a slight hesitation in her demeanor, something I couldn't quite place. My apartment wasn't much, but she seemed anxious as we walked toward the bedroom. She sighed, her hands resting gently on my chest. "Nathan, will you please make love to me in your bed?" she whispered. Her voice was soft, a mix of tenderness and desire, and her hands slowly slid down my chest. The combination of her vulnerability and our deep connection was overwhelming. I somehow managed to undress her without making a fool of myself, though my own clothes were not so lucky, buttons and boxers scattered across the room. Clara gasped, moaned softly, and whispered my name as I pulled her back onto the bed, holding her close. We lay there, side by side, content and smiling. "Did you enjoy it?" she asked, her voice filled with sincerity. "Yeah, of course," I replied, though the exhaustion from the night before began to settle in. "But I'm not sure I can keep up with this. I'm wiped out, and my body feels like it's been through a marathon." She laughed, her energy not nearly as spent as mine. We massaged each other's backs, the silence between us comfortable, until after about an hour, she suddenly asked, "Am I ruining your plans for the day?" "Well, my plans definitely changed after last night," I said, still trying to adjust to the whirlwind of emotions. "How about we go to the movies tonight?" Her smile lit up the room. "Actually," she said, "why don't you come over for dinner? And we can watch a movie on my big screen TV?" "Sounds good," I chuckled. "When should I come?" "How about 5:30? You can help me chop vegetables," she teased. After she left, I was left alone with my thoughts for a moment. What the hell am I doing? This is your mother-in-law, I reminded myself. If Emily finds out, it's over. And Clara, she might be falling for you. Do you really want to hurt her? She's the best woman you've ever met. I buried my face in my hands, muttering, "Oh, shit." I couldn't shake the thought of what Clara had said earlier. My mind was a chaotic mess for the next half hour, but eventually, I decided to go with the flow and deal with the consequences later. I had enough on my plate already. My internal debate finally quieted, and I tried to focus on the weekend ahead. Taking things one step at a time led to an unexpectedly fun weekend. We cooked together on Saturday night, laughed over silly moments while preparing the meal, and watched half a movie before heading to her couch for some alone time. We made love in her bed, and it felt so different than anything I had known before. Sunday morning, we worked out at her health club and then went for a hike in the nearby wilderness. Afterward, we had sex in the back seat of my car, sweaty and carefree. After all that, we still had enough energy for another round in her bed that Sunday night. By Monday morning, I felt strangely at peace. The whirlwind of emotions had finally slowed down. But that peace was shattered when Clara said, "Nathan, we need to talk before you go to work." "Nathan, can you just listen to what I have to say before you say anything?" she asked, her voice timid. "This is hard for me, and I just want to get through it without interruptions. Okay?" I nodded, squeezing her hands gently. "Okay." She took a deep breath, and then launched into a 15-minute monologue, speaking clearly but steadily, barely pausing for breath despite her obvious anxiety. She told me that she had loved me from the moment we met, that I was the only man she had truly ever loved. Then, she explained all the reasons why a long-term relationship between us wasn't realistic. Her age, 11 years older than me, what it would do to her relationship with Emily, her inability to give me the children I wanted, and the awareness that I might never feel the same way about her as she did about me. Despite all that, she said, "I'll accept whatever you can give me. I'll always be here for you." I was speechless. When she finished, she said, "Go to work. I'm sorry for taking up so much of your time." I kissed her deeply, then looked into her eyes, lost for words. "I've got a lot to think about. Please don't be upset if we don't see each other for a couple of weeks," she said softly. I usually make decisions quickly, but this weekend, it scrambled my thoughts. "I need some time." She smiled, kissed me on the lips, and with a playful nudge, urged me toward the door. And it wasn't an exaggeration when I said my mind was a whirlwind over the next 2 weeks. Every moment I wasn't absorbed in work or distracted by something else. My thoughts kept circling back to Clara, Emily, the sex, the guilt. Every night, I dreamed of Clara, of traveling the world with her, laughing together, and in one particularly disturbing dream, having a dozen kids. I called Clara every day just to chat for a few minutes. She never pressured me, kept the conversation light, and we both enjoyed the casual exchanges. Then, one day, she casually mentioned that Emily had asked if she was seeing anyone. "You look the happiest I've ever seen you, Mom," Emily had said. Clara hadn't said anything in response, just left it hanging there, the weight of the words unspoken. 2 weeks later, I invited Clara over for dinner on a Saturday night. She seemed eager, and I was glad for the chance to spend time with her. I didn't have any grand plans, just wanted to see if we could connect outside of the physical side of things. We ended up spending the entire night together, making love twice. I knew, deep down, I was falling for her. But the 11-year age gap, the fact that she was still my mother-in-law, and all the complications in between made it hard for me to come to any conclusions. Still, our relationship somehow survived the final divorce, and not long after, Clara took Emily on a week-long cruise. When they returned, Clara told me that the trip had worked wonders for Emily. Her anger toward me had nearly disappeared, and she seemed to have accepted that she was the one who had been at fault all along. "Did Emily ask about your love life?" I asked, trying to gauge the situation. Clara paused for a moment before answering. "Yes," she finally said. "So, what did you say?" I pressed, trying to push past the hesitation. Another long silence followed, and eventually, Clara told me that she'd told Emily she was happy but wasn't sure if it would last, and didn't want to introduce me anytime soon. If things had stayed the same, if a major shift hadn't happened, I might have stayed stuck in indecision for months, maybe even years. But by then, I knew I loved Clara. We were spending at least 3 nights a week together, and we talked on the phone every day. Even though I had been married to Emily for over 5 years, my connection with Clara felt more genuine, more real. Yes, Clara had been inexperienced the first time we were together, but that had changed. Now, she was loving, expressive, adventurous, and full of life. The turning point came one Friday afternoon when Clara called me at the office. We had plans to see a play that night, followed by some private time together. But she was in tears, pleading for me to come to her house immediately. I rushed over, getting to her place just after 3 p.m. When Clara opened the door, it was clear she had been crying. Without saying a word, she threw herself into my arms, and I held her tightly, letting her cry for a few minutes before I carried her to the living room couch. "Okay, tell me what's going on," I said, holding her hands gently. "I swear, I didn't plan for any of this," she sobbed, her words coming in broken gasps. "I didn't know this was possible. Please don't hate me. You can leave if you want." I was completely confused, unsure of what she meant. I took a deep breath, calming myself before I asked, "Stop. Just tell me what's going on. I don't understand." She sniffled and took a shaky breath before finally saying, "I'm 7 weeks pregnant." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. We had discussed the possibility before. Clara had often shared her regrets about not being able to have children. I knew she'd tried with Gary, but it hadn't worked out. Years ago, after Emily was born, a doctor had told her she probably wouldn't be able to conceive again, though she couldn't remember the specifics. As I processed the shocking news, I was left momentarily speechless. My mind raced, and my eyes must have widened in disbelief. Clara, thinking my silence meant anger or rejection, began crying harder. The intensity of her emotion made me fear for her well-being. I gently cupped her face in my hands, looking deep into her eyes, and said, "I need some time to think about all of this. Please don't be upset if I need a couple of weeks to figure things out." She smiled weakly through her tears, kissed me quickly on the lips, and nudged me toward the door, as if she didn't want to hold me back. That night, my dreams were filled with images of Clara and me, traveling to exotic places, holding each other, and, in one particularly unsettling dream, raising a dozen children together. For the next 2 weeks, I called Clara every day. The conversations remained light, just catching up, but she casually mentioned that Emily had asked, "You look the happiest I've ever seen you, Mom. Are you seeing someone?" Clara hadn't answered, leaving it hanging in the air. 2 weeks later, I invited Clara over for dinner again, and this time she was more than happy to come. I hadn't planned it, but I wanted to see how we connected when we weren't in the heat of the moment. That night, we ended up back at her place, making love twice. I could feel myself falling deeper for her, but the 11-year age gap and the complicated history between us made it difficult to commit to anything. Still, we survived the divorce. Afterward, Clara took Emily on the week-long cruise. When they returned, she said it had worked wonders, easing Emily's anger and helping her come to terms with the role she had played in the breakdown of our marriage. "Did Emily ask about your love life?" I asked, still trying to read the situation. Clara paused before replying, "Yes." "So, what did you say?" I pressed, eager for more details. Another long pause, and she finally told me that she had told Emily she was happy, but she wasn't sure if it would last, and she wasn't ready to introduce me into her life yet. Had a major shift not happened, I might have stayed stuck in indecision for months or even years, but I finally admitted to myself that I loved Clara. We spent at least 3 evenings a week together, talking every day. Despite being married to Emily for over 5 years, my connection with Clara was deeper, more real, and without the complications I had once believed were insurmountable. Yes, Clara had been a bit inexperienced when we first got together, but now she was not just experienced. She was adventurous, loving, expressive, and full of energy. The tipping point came when she called me at work on a Friday afternoon. We had planned a night out, a play followed by some private time. But she was in tears, begging me to come to her house immediately. I rushed over, arriving just after 3 p.m. When she opened the door, it was clear something was wrong. She rushed into my arms, and I held her for a while, letting her cry on my shoulder before I helped her to the couch. "Okay, tell me what's going on," I said, gently holding her hands. "I swear I didn't plan for any of this." She sobbed, her words choked with emotion. "I didn't know this was even possible. Please don't hate me. You can leave if you want." I was lost, confused, and had no idea what she was talking about. After a moment, I managed to calm her down, then looked her in the eyes. "Tell me what's going on, Clara. I really don't understand." She sniffled, took a deep breath, and then said, "I'm 7 weeks pregnant." That was a bombshell I wasn't expecting. We had talked about the possibility before, and I knew Clara regretted not being able to have more children, especially after her failed attempts with Gary. But I hadn't seen this coming. My mind was completely foggy, and for a moment, I couldn't even find my voice. Clara, probably mistaking my silence for anger or rejection, started crying uncontrollably. The tears came so fast and hard, I worried it could spiral into something worse. Then, suddenly, everything in my head cleared up. That's when I realized how much I truly loved her. More than I ever thought was possible. And I knew, deep down, I wanted a child with her. The age difference didn't matter. It was time to make a decision, and I knew what that decision had to be. I gently cupped her face in my hands, wiping away her tears with my thumbs. "Please stop crying, Clara. I need to ask you something," I said softly. I repeated it again and again until she calmed down enough for me to ask, "Will you marry me and make me the happiest man alive?" It took her a moment to process my words, but when she finally understood, a smile spread across her face. "Yes," she whispered, her tears drying. We wrapped each other in a tight embrace, and I whispered how much I loved her. She told me she'd been the happiest woman for the last 6 months, and now even happier. Just then, we heard the front door open. "Mom, are you here?" Emily's voice echoed from the hallway. We froze, like two deer caught in headlights, as she walked into the living room. Her face shifted from confusion to shock as she took in the sight of us. "What's going on, Nathan?" Emily asked, her voice tight with surprise. I couldn't bring myself to answer right away, but Clara did. Without thinking, she blurted out something I'm sure she hadn't planned on saying. "I'm 7 weeks pregnant with Nathan's baby," Clara said, "and we're getting married." At first, Emily's face showed a hint of a smile, like she thought this was some kind of joke. But when she saw the seriousness in my eyes and the way Clara and I were holding each other, the smile slowly faded. Her expression blanked, and before I knew it, she collapsed. I rushed to her and caught her just before she hit the floor, then carried her to the sofa where Clara had been sitting. Clara wasted no time. She grabbed some smelling salts and a cold compress, doing everything she could to revive Emily. When she turned to me, she said, "I think it's best if you leave before she wakes up." Then, with a hopeful smile, she added, "Can we go ring shopping tomorrow?" "Of course," I said, leaning down to kiss her. "I'll give my tickets to tonight's show to a friend. Just let me know when to pick you up tomorrow," I said. After another kiss, I left, handing my tickets to a friend and his wife, who were excited to take them. I even volunteered to babysit their kids as a favor. But we didn't end up going ring shopping on Saturday. Around noon, Clara called to let me know that Emily would be staying with her for the night, and that it might take the whole weekend for them to sort things out. I understood, and I told Clara I loved her. "We'll go shopping as soon as we can, hopefully on Monday," I added. She chuckled softly before hanging up. "Hopefully it'll be Monday." I wasn't sure what exactly went down between Clara and Emily, but I knew that Clara loved Emily deeply, just as any mother would love her child. Despite the mess Emily had made with Ethan, the two of them had been a team for years before I came into the picture. Clara assured me she had been completely upfront with Emily about her feelings for me, and that there had been no romantic or sexual involvement between us until my marriage to Emily was truly over. Clara understood the awkwardness of the situation for Emily, but she needed her more than ever now. I had to give Emily credit. Despite her sadness, she was genuinely happy for her mother, who had never experienced real love until me. She was even excited about the prospect of a younger sibling. Emily and I didn't plan on being close, but I made it clear I held no ill will. I promised to always treat her with respect, and I reassured her that I hadn't meant to hurt her. I just couldn't help falling in love with Clara. There was one little challenge, if you could even call it that, and it had to do with Clara's heightened libido, thanks to her pregnancy. She jokingly said she needed to make up for 2 decades without real sex. Who was I to argue? We had an active sex life right up until she was 8 months and a week pregnant, at which point we had to take a break until 2 months after Ava, our beautiful daughter, was born. Clara and I got married in a simple ceremony 2 months before Ava's birth. We showed Emily nothing but respect, and she was even a bridesmaid at our wedding. Although I had completely forgiven Emily, I didn't exactly feel the same way about Ethan. Once the divorce proceedings began, I hired a private investigator to track him. When I found out he was getting married, I sent his fiancée a full report detailing his relationship with Emily and how it had ruined our marriage. I was satisfied when I saw that she left him within a week of receiving my letter, and he quickly relocated to another city. After Ava was born, Clara and I decided we wanted another child. We didn't want to go through another pregnancy for Clara, so we opted for egg retrieval with Gary's financial support. We fertilized one of Clara's eggs with my sperm and hired a surrogate mother. When Ava was 15 months old, the surrogate gave birth to our son, Liam. Now, both of our children are 5 and 6 years old, and my love for Clara grows stronger every day. I never thought a relationship could be so fulfilling, or that we could maintain such a passionate, intense connection. Emily, meanwhile, married a guy we both like, and she's expecting a baby girl next month. I've wondered about what kind of relationship her daughter will have with ours, but honestly, I've stopped trying to figure it out. All I know is that Clara will love her granddaughter just as much as she loves our children. It's like Clara has an endless capacity for love.